the oil choke point that could crash the global economy.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tackling a really big what-if scenario. We're going to walk through what happens when the world's most critical oil choke point just closes. This is all based on some fascinating analysis from energy expert Rory Johnston, so let's get right into it.
So let's just ask the question plainly. What actually happens? We're not talking about a small hiccup here. We are talking about the single largest loss of oil supply in history, happening poof, overnight. The fallout is so massive, so unthinkable, that for decades it's been the one thing everybody assumed could never ever happen. And this is the number at the absolute heart of the crisis. Before this hypothetical shutdown, 20 million barrels of petroleum passed through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. Now think about that. The entire world uses about 100 million barrels a day. So this one little choke point handles a full 20% of all global supply. It's staggering.
If this oil route gets disrupted, what do you think happens first?
I love how Rory Johnston puts it here. He doesn't just call it a disruption. He says it's like someone stepping on the world's hydrocarbon aorta. It's the big one. It is the boogeyman that haunts the oil markets. The one risk so huge, you kind of just hope it stays a ghost story.
Okay, so let's really dig in and quantify this shock. We need to understand why it's so much bigger than anything we've worried about before. Time for a little barrel math.
Right, so that 20 million barrels a day, it isn't just one thing. About 15 million of that is crude oil, the raw stuff that comes out of the ground. But, and this is critical, it's also 5 million barrels of refined products. We're talking about the diesel, the jet fuel, the things we actually use every day.
Now, not every single drop is lost right away. Some countries, like Saudi Arabia, have these huge strategic pipelines that can reroute about 7 million barrels to the Red Sea, bypassing the Strait. But even with that, you're left with a massive, massive hole. 13 million barrels a day of production doesn't just disappear. It has to be shut in. That means the wells are literally turned off.
And this chart really puts it all into perspective. Remember all the panic back in 2022 about losing Russian oil? At the absolute worst, the world was worried about maybe 3 million barrels a day going offline. Well, the Hormuz closure is more than 4 times bigger than that. It's not even the same league. It's a totally different kind of crisis.
Okay, so when a crisis this huge hits, the financial markets start sending out these really powerful and honestly pretty weird signals. If you can understand them, you can understand the crisis. So, the key term you're going to hear thrown around is backwardation. It sounds complicated, but it's not. All it means is that a barrel of oil for delivery right now costs more, sometimes a lot more, than a barrel for delivery a year from now. Now, it's super easy to look at that and think, oh, the market must be pessimistic about the future. But that is exactly wrong. What backwardation is actually telling you is that there's an extreme, desperate shortage today. The market isn't saying the future is cheap, it's screaming, I am suffocating, I need oil right now.
Johnson has a really great way to think about this. Don't see it as a discount on oil for later. See it as a massive premium for what he calls ASAP barrels, as soon as possible barrels. The market is willing to pay just about anything to get a physical barrel in its hands today, not next month.
So, a screaming financial market. What does that actually mean for you and me? Let's connect these abstract numbers to the real-world consequences that would ripple across the entire global economy.
The real pain point, the epicenter of this crisis, would be diesel and jet fuel. Their prices completely disconnect from crude oil. You'd see wholesale diesel prices basically double or triple overnight, and then the dominoes fall. Shippers add these huge fuel surcharges to everything, flights get canceled, or the tickets become ridiculously expensive. And while those of us in wealthier nations feel that price pain, it's the developing world, the global south, that faces actual shortages. They're the ones who are literally forced to go without fuel.
But you know what? There's an even scarier possibility here. Johnston uses this great analogy. He says closing the strait is like putting a kink in a garden hose. You can unkink it and the water flows again. The much greater danger is if the conflict escalates and people start attacking infrastructure, the refineries, the processing plants. That, he says, is like taking a shotgun to the faucet itself. That's damage that takes years, not months, to fix.
And even in the best-case kinked hose scenario, once the Straits reopens, the recovery is not instant. You can't just flip a switch on 13 million barrels of oil production. It takes a long time to get things running again. You're looking at a 3-month ramp-up period where millions and millions of barrels of supply are still lost, even as things are supposedly getting back to normal. So this is obviously a global crisis, but it makes you wonder, what does it mean for a major energy producer like Canada? And what new risks does this whole scenario expose for the rest of the world? Let's take a look.
This leads to a pretty obvious question, right? In a world that is absolutely starved for oil, can a huge producer like Canada jump in and save the day?
And the answer, based on Johnston's analysis, is, well, it's blunt. Functionally, nothing. The Canadian energy sector is built to be a stable, predictable system. It's not built for speed. It's all about long-term planning, not scrambling to respond to a crisis. There's just no spare capacity you can flick on to make a real difference.
And that really highlights a different way to think about big energy projects, like pipelines. They aren't just about day-to-day business. In a world like this, they become a form of national insurance. Sure, they might seem expensive or underused when things are calm, but during a crisis, their strategic value is absolutely existential.
And this all leads us to the end game, the old reality where the US Navy basically guaranteed the free flow of oil. People called it the Carter Doctrine. Well, that's pretty much over. This crisis could create a new reality where a country like Iran could control the Strait, maybe even set up a toll system for ships to pass. The end result is a world that is fundamentally less stable, where the risk of this happening again is so much higher. Which leaves all of us with a final and pretty sobering question. A scenario like this really forces you to confront just how fragile these global systems we rely on are. It really makes you wonder, have we taken this era of cheap, reliable energy for granted? And is that era now coming to an end? It's something to think about.